An absolutely stunning win for Carlos Sainz in the Mexican Grand Prix. The Ferrari driver on the pole, didn't lead from the start, had to fight very hard in the early laps, but once he got free air in front of him, just superb. And there were some lovely little radio transmissions as well, where he was saying, I think we're going hard enough. We don't need the pressure from behind. In other words, tell Charles Leclerc to back away, please. And other little things like that, where Carlos was just emphasizing his position in the team as the dominant driver this weekend. All this to the backdrop of the reality that he's going to be sacked by Ferrari at the end of the year. And I use that word sacked because it's absolutely right. He politely says, I'm leaving Ferrari at the end of the year. Of course, he has to say that. But Ferrari is sacking him, basically. And it is just incredible to me that a driver of this quality, who fits in so well with the team, who's so harmonious with the mechanics and the way things work at Ferrari, is being dropped. Anyway, I know why he's being dropped. We won't go any further down there, but what a win for Carlos Sainz. Great to see his dad there as well. Just what a day for the Sainz family. Just superb. Lots of pressure too. Lots of pressure early on at the start. As I said, from the pole, it's never an easy run down into that first corner. Turn 1 in Mexico. It's a long run, and slipstreams certainly come into play. There's no DRS, of course. And it was Max Verstappen, kind of as predicted, who was on the front row, who managed to get the inside run into turn 1 on that first lap. And Carlos stayed with it on the outside out of 1, rejoined in front of Max, and then did exactly the right thing. He dropped back and gave the position to Max. I wonder at this point what the guys on the McLaren pit wall were thinking. Yeah, this is what we should have done in Austin. Too late for that, of course, but perfect judgment by Carlos Sainz. Didn't need any instructions from the pit wall about that one. It was just give the position back. I can beat this guy on the track. And that's exactly what he did. Beautiful pass 2 or 3 laps later after the safety car had come in. Yuki Tsunoda went off before the first corner, under braking for the first corner really, in a crash with Alex Albon in the V car that had just been rebuilt overnight after his shunt in Q2 in qualifying yesterday. Probably even more damage to this one. He hit the wall quite hard with the rear. Anyway, safety car came out and Carlos was just superb after that. Took the lead and walked away with it, really. There was pressure right at the end when Lando Norris eventually got past Charles Leclerc and he was up to P2. And the gap then was about 6 to 7 seconds. And it was pretty clear that Lando's car at that point, even compared with Carlos's Ferrari, had more grip, more balance, and was looking after its tyres a little bit better. Everybody on the hard tyre at that point. It was a one-stop strategy race. Started on the medium, went to the hard. But Carlos just stayed absolutely cool as you could possibly be and crossed the line to win, doing one of those wonderful swerves down towards the pit wall, spraying everybody with debris. He would have loved that as well. The Ferrari pit particularly, I think. This wasn't Mark Webber saying not bad for the wrong side of the garage, or I think for the other side of the garage, as he said after the British Grand Prix memorably that year when he beat Sebastian Vettel. But this was Carlos saying, well, you're going to drop me, but here's some stuff for your red shirts. I know they have protective stuff these days, but nonetheless, the gesture was there. Wonderful to see. And yeah, I just thought Carlos was superb. And against that, Charles Leclerc had a tough race, and he should really have been second. He took second place, actually, when Max and Lando were doing their thing, and sneaked inside, got away, and at that point, he was going to start to put pressure on Carlos, but he was called in first to cover Lando Norris, who'd come in obviously a little bit earlier to try to get the undercut, which gave a bit of an advantage to Carlos. And then Carlos actually disobeyed team orders and stayed out 1 lap extra, as he would, George Russell style, just to get 1 more lap out of the medium so he'd have fresher hards. And it paid off beautifully. He drove so well, and he planned the race so well, and he thought about the race so well. And Charles early on had engine rising temperatures, as he would in traffic. Very, very tough on cooling here. Ferrari, like everybody, had extra louvers for cooling. But if you're stuck in traffic, as Charles was, I say stuck in traffic, traffic in front was going the same speed. It's not as if he could do anything about it. And the temperatures were going up, and the tyres, therefore, also went off in the debris from, not the debris, but in the turbulence of the Sainz Ferrari. And that's where Carlos started to eke away and drove a race right up there with the very best of a Lewis Hamilton win or a Max Verstappen win or a Charles Leclerc win, you got to say. I mean, this was just a class performance. For sure the best race weekend and race win he's ever had, I would say. I'd say it's the best one ever for Carlos. And just wonderful to see. So Charles should have been second really, but his tyres went off really badly towards the end of the race, partly because he'd been in this in the slipstream with Carlos, and Lando was all over him in the closing stages, and forced Charles into a big error coming out of. It's not, we don't often see big errors coming out of the Piratello these days because it's a much slower corner. It's got a tight early apex, and then it just sort of opens out. And he just lost it on acceleration, a bit like you can lose it, I guess, coming out of the chicane at Suzuka just before the start-finish line. Very odd to see that, but the back end obviously got away from him, and he had to use a lot of road and a lot of extra road as well on the outside. And Lando didn't even have to use DRS at that point to get past, just breezed past and took second place. But the interesting thing was that then meant that Charles could now, had such a big gap over the two Mercedes. He had such a big gap. He could come in and put on a set of soft tyres and set fastest lap. Whereas if Lando had been in third place, he presumably would have done that. So the fastest lap went to Charles, which is good for Ferrari. Not so good for McLaren and Lando. We're only talking about 1 point though, of course. And I suppose from Ferrari's point of view, it mitigated a little bit the loss of second place. And what would they be thinking? You know, our number one driver, the guy we're keeping and who's going to be out there with Lewis Hamilton next year, is beaten by Lando Norris, and we're saved by Carlos Sainz. Wow, what an internal dynamic that is. And Carlos is such a humble person and such a good person that he won't rub their noses in it. No way. Of course, adulation is the wrong word. Adulation in Mexico for Carlos, but the euphoria of winning that Mexican Grand Prix the way he did will totally counterbalance any feeling of "I told you, you're doing the wrong thing" or whatever he might be thinking. And so, yeah, the plot thickens. I say it thickens because Perez had another terrible race, which began by stopping short or long, obviously, on his grid slot. The last driver I can remember doing that was Pierre Gasly, I think, in a Spanish Grand Prix a couple of years ago. And now Perez has done that. I mean, that is inexcusable, really. I mean, there's a million things that can go wrong in a Grand Prix. There's a million things that you don't get right on a Grand Prix car throughout the Grand Prix distance. But the few things that are in your control, like starting in the right grid slot, you know, no excuse for not doing those. And he didn't. He got a penalty for that, and then he had to make a second pit stop. He's in traffic, and he wasn't happy with the car anyway. Anyway, I saw that in the context of when I mentioned the plot thickens, because Red Bull must be thinking. I can't imagine that they wouldn't be thinking of, we've got to try and put Carlos Sainz in that car for next year. I'd be absolutely shocked if they're not thinking that. And if they're not, they should be. Because he should be in that car alongside Max Verstappen. He's the perfect driver for Red Bull. And we've got Franco Colapinto standing on the sidelines next year that Williams love, and he's doing a good job, drove well again in Mexico. And he should be in the Williams next year. And Carlos Sainz, thank you very much, has put him in the Red Bull, and Checo should be waving to the crowd into the sunset. I just, you know, and I think after this weekend, there's even more chance that might happen. But anyway, we'll have to wait and see. Of course, they might put Colapinto in a Red Bull, but I mean, it'd be much more logical to put Carlos Sainz in there for sure. Anyway, it's interesting if you look at those three results and how quick Lando was once he'd got through all the early lap skirmishes with Max Verstappen, and once he'd realised that his race, when he put the radio up, once he got onto his hard tyres and he got on the radio and said, "What sort of lap times is Charles doing?" And they said, I think at the time he was doing something like 20.8 or 20.7 or something like that. And immediately Lando starts doing 20.3s, 20.2s, and you know there's going to be a race on. And so it proved. And he just drove superbly. I think it gives rise to the question of, where was he in qualifying? Why did he only qualify third? Which is what I did say yesterday. I mean, it was a bit of a surprising result for me that he didn't. And I put it down to not having enough seat time and McLaren's odd decision. I say it's odd because I know they had their reasons, but their odd decision to stand him down in FP1, this guy who's potentially right in the running for the Drivers' World Championship. They didn't have him out in the car in FP1 yesterday. And I think that catches up. And I think Charles Leclerc kind of confirmed that after the race when he said he was on the back foot from yesterday onwards. Translation, I wasn't in the car either. And if you look at those results, Carlos Sainz was, and he was like a bullet from the minute FP1 began on Friday, totally in sync with the car and the team. whereas Charles had to get in a car that had just been kind of rebuilt after that shunt that Behrman had, and then Lando had to get in the car from Pato O'Ward, and I think that just did put them on the back foot. And I think what you see there is the result of what happened in FP1, to be honest, under the heading of Carlos Sainz absolutely maximised the opportunity he was given. Fourth and fifth were the two Mercedes, way off the pace, early, and a lot of racing between the two of them. A massive amount of racing. George was behind Lewis and then eventually got Lewis. And then later on, just after his pit stop, something broke on the front wing. It looked like they said there was something asymmetric on the front wing, and he started to lose a bit of the balance and the feel of the car. And Lewis was all over him, but couldn't get past. And George was just absolutely using every bit of road. I don't know how long it went on, for 20 laps or something like that. And again, I wonder, as I said many times, I think Mercedes are very fortunate they actually don't have a race-winning, championship-winning car, because you can imagine the fireworks that he would have had over the last 2 or 3 years between George and Lewis. As it was, they're only racing for 4th or 5th place, so it didn't really matter at all. And afterwards, Lewis said there was something wrong with the floor as well, I think, on his car. Yeah, neither car was good, and neither car was particularly competitive. But that's what you get if you have the two best drivers you can possibly have. If it was Bottas Hamilton, it would have been a different race for Mercedes. And if it was Ricciardo Lando would have more points now, as I've pointed out endlessly in separate videos and so forth. But there's this thing for having the two best guys you can get, and it does penalise you sometimes. And then Max Verstappen finished 6th, a very distant 6th, with 2 10-second penalties. And when various other drivers heard Verstappen's got a 20-second penalty, they'll think, wow, 20 seconds. Of course, 2 10s, not quite as bad as 120, I suppose. And so the verdict on those, I think the first one, which was a Lando thing, is a little bit like going into the second chicane at Monza when Piastri went round the outside of Lando. Lando was doing that to Max. And whereas Lando at Monza just moved the steering to the left and gave Piastri room, but as a result had a bit of a moment and Leclerc got him. Here, obviously, Max was never going to do that in a million years, and he didn't actually go off track anything. Max just used all the road, and in my book, if you're on the inside, you're entitled to use all the road. If the guy wants to try and pass you on the outside, so be it. But of course, that isn't the rule book. And I think from Max's point of view, it was not very good judgment, really, because it was pretty clear after everything had happened in Austin and the way Lando went off track, it was pretty clear that the logical thing would have been then to have dropped back and given Lando that position. But he didn't. And then I think he made a big mistake because he went into the S's, turn 7, the first left, where you never pass, and Lando was sort of middle of the road and went boom down the inside. For all those that think that it was entirely Lewis Hamilton's fault at Copse Corner, Silverstone 21, take note here, his Lando going down the inside in the way Lewis did into Copse, left-hander rather than right-hander, but similar move, similar speed as well, going into that left-hander, and immediately ran wide. And Lando had to run wide to avoid him there, and he got another penalty for that. Now that one I think was totally justified because A, it was not really a place to overtake, and B, I don't think Max would have done that if there were a line of trees there, or a guardrail, or a rock wall. I think he did it because there's all that runoff area. And that's not right. If you're making decisions about trackcraft and what you're doing when you're racing another car, you don't base a move on, oh, well, if something goes wrong, I can go off into the runoff area. If you do, you should get penalised, in my view. And I think that's exactly what happened there. And they correctly gave him a penalty for that. I'm not sure about the first one because my view. I think if you're on the inside, really, you try and pass at your peril on the outside. But I know that's not the rule. I know that's the rule book is that you've got to give room to the guy on the outside. So, and I think also in the context of sort of anticipating what the stewards might do here to Max if he did anything slightly out of the ordinary after what happened in Austin. I think, if you're Red Bull, you would say, Max, just calm it, because for sure they'll be right on top of you. And I'm surprised that they didn't. It was sort of an aggressive thing, and Max was aggressive. And I think he was also quite wound up because he'd got some sort of battery charging issue going on. Not the first time we've seen that at Red Bull either this year. I have been saying all the time, we talk about pace of the cars and how it's going to go over the next, 4 races now. And people talk about, Lando here, maybe the Red Bull will be good there. I've often said reliability is also a factor. You cannot assume that the Red Bull is going to be as reliable as the McLaren-Mercedes, because it hasn't been. And here we had another issue. This was some sort of battery charging issue. It seemed to resolve itself, and Max was pretty quick in a straight, well, he was very quick in a straight line after about 15 laps. But early on, he was on the radio saying, how am I supposed to drive this thing if I haven't got any charging going on? And I think he was a bit of red mist going on there, and it was just like, well, if they can't give me the power, I will save the day behind the wheel with what I do with the steering. And I think that was a little bit of what we saw in Max today, which you could say, I think half the people out there will say, well, that's why he's never going to be as good as Michael, or whatever you want to say. And that's why some people say, well, that's why he's such a racing driver. It depends how you want to look at that one. He's got a pretty simplistic approach to racing life, Max Verstappen, which is, there's a gap, I'm going for it. Couldn't be more simple than that. Kevin Magnussen drove really well. Totally uneventful race by Kevin's standards to finish P7 for Haas Ferrari. What a result. Nico Hülkenberg P9. Both cars in the points yet again. What a season they're having. And Oscar Piastri, after his mistake yesterday, drove pretty well and showed how quick that McLaren was, up to P8 to finish in the points too. And Pierre Gasly got a point, qualified really well. He was up there and he held his position, and he still, he beat the likes of Lance Stroll in the Aston Martin and the Williams guys, and Liam Lawson, who had a big we had a front wing skirmish thing with, I think it was Franco Colapinto, as he would, aggressive driver. So yeah, it was always going to be a dramatic race. It was always going to be dramatic in those early laps as well, because that long straight, that tight turn 1, turn 2 combination, and then lots of opportunities to overtake with DRS. But at the end of the day, my feeling is that McLaren had the faster car this weekend, the McLaren-Mercedes. I think it was a better car over the lap, and also in terms of looking after its tyres. And had Lando qualified on the front row, I'm not saying on the pole, because it doesn't necessarily mean much in Mexico, but had he qualified on the front row, and had he got the lead at the start, two big ifs, I know, but as I say, I think it was the best car. I think he would have walked that race. He wouldn't have walked it, but I think he would have led it profoundly from start to finish. And I think Carlos would have been second. But because that didn't happen in qualifying, he didn't get quite enough out of the car in the closing phase of Q3. The win went to Ferrari. And of the two Ferrari drivers, it was Carlos Sainz, the guy who was there in FP1, who just did the most magical job. I can only imagine what it's like now back in Madrid at the house of the Sainz family, and how they're feeling. It's just like, okay, that's what Ferrari do. Who cares? He's going to be in a Williams next year. Yeah, we know. He's won the Mexican Grand Prix. He's beaten Charles like that, and he's done it. You don't have to do a lot more now. Of course, it'd be great to win a world championship from Carlos's point of view. I suppose the only other thing is, let's wait for the phone to ring from Christian Horner or Helmut Marko to see if there's a deal to be done there. If I was Carlos, I'd be pushing for that. But knowing Carlos, he's a gentleman, and he probably will wait for the phone to ring. But what a guy. What a great result for him. Congratulations to him and to Ferrari and to Freddy Vasseur for doing that. And for the mixed feelings they must have. And what sort of farewell are they going to have for Carlos at Ferrari when he walks out of the door the last time? How are they going to do that? Yeah, interesting to know. Anyway, big thanks to OEM Exclusive, to Jetcraft, and to Track Ninja. Thanks for your support, and thank you to the viewer for your support as well. As you can see, I'm not in my normal studio. Hope this has turned out okay. The audio is good and everything else. I'll check it now. See you soon.